Good morning, and thank you all for attending this conference. I was really pleased to receive the invitation to it and to know that we're having such an important discussion here in Budapest. Actually, it brought back two memories. First is that my first place of dwelling here in Budapest was right around the corner on Magyar utca, and I never actually entered this building, although we came to the garden frequently, so it's really nice to be here. The second memory, something you may not know, a few years ago, we founded a blog called Post-Liberal Order, which you may have heard about. It's on Substack, and that was founded with my colleagues, Patrick Deneen and Adrian Vermeulen and Chad Pecknold. But it was actually founded near Normatha because I was on a hike one afternoon with my family, and my colleagues in the US said, you know, we need to found a journal called Post-Liberal Order. Let's get on a call right now. So I pulled out my phone and we had a Zoom call. And while we were walking down the paths of Normatha, the Post-Liberal Order was founded. So Post-Liberal Order was founded in Budapest, I think, in more ways than one. So there's always a lot of discussion of post-liberalism in the media, particularly since the return of President Trump along with Vice President Vance. You're constantly seeing these explanations online of the supposed influences and figures and strains of thought that are behind the new administration. First of all, I think that this is an unfair way of putting the strands of influence. The principal people who have influenced the direction of political thinking in recent years are President Trump, Vice President Vance, Prime Minister Orban, and the others who have taken politics in a national sovereignty direction. So thankfully, there has been some intellectual work done around this, but the leadership fundamentally began with them because they saw the problems that were coming up in the late liberal system clearly and organized their political movements around it. The second thought that comes to mind is that the description by the progressive liberal left of these movements is always in the most scary way. If Donald Trump comes back to power, if Prime Minister Orban stays in power, if the post-liberals have influence, then they say it's going to be The Handmaid's Tale, it's going to be the Black Legend is coming back, everything that you like in the modern world is going to be taken away. And I was thinking, where does this idea come from? It's actually a narrative that is built deeply into the original story of liberalism. And I mean that in a very specific way. The early liberal thinkers held that human beings were fundamentally anti-social, anti-civic, and basically uncivilized. So from the standpoint of the early liberal political philosophers, the natural tendency of mankind is toward barbarism and violence and destruction. And certainly we can admit, particularly for Christians who understand the concept of original sin, that this is a tendency. But fundamentally for the early liberal thinkers, politics is not something natural. So when people organize themselves into a polity and asserted before liberalism that it is for a particular goal and that society should be organized and directed to such a common good, from the standpoint of the liberals, this was basically on a path to destruction. So according to the liberal understanding of human nature, there is a very nasty reality to human beings, which can only be prevented from arising. And when we prevent that from arising, and when we orient our politics just around very narrow concepts of freedom and security, then by accident, as it were, or by a complex design, the modern world can emerge. But what clearly happened over time, and particularly in the last 50 years, is that liberals began to abandon even this pretense of neutrality. This is a common point that's made in the post-liberal discourse. The post-liberals are not just seeking to replace the liberal, neutral society of freedom with some dark image. Again, this is the kind of the founding myth of liberalism. Rather, the liberals themselves constructed in their mind and through public policy an ideal person and an ideal way of life. In the last 30 years, particularly through the European and EU elite, it became very clear what type of person that is. The ideal person and the person that is the intended product of liberal civilization is principally considered an isolated individual who has their own individual preferences and can satisfy them through a variety of means. Maybe you satisfy them in one country, or maybe you bounce around and satisfy them in a variety of countries. We begin to leave behind the identification of nations and civic identity and view ourselves as consumers. So the more traditional elements of society, the emphasis on family, faith, community, and nation, are somehow threats to this. These begin to be perceived as something belonging to the old world, something belonging to the nasty underbelly of human society. Those are the things which, when they are allowed to flourish and they are allowed to have political influence or even political control, those are the things which take society in a bad and dangerous direction. Those things, and nationalism in particular, are perceived by the late liberal political viewpoint as the causes of strife and the causes of violence. So each of those things must be set aside. One thing that frequently happens in debates now is that liberals pretend not to be opposed to these things. They will say, well, there's nothing strictly required in the development of progressive liberalism to set aside the family and to set aside the nation. First of all, that's not true. The many liberal thinkers, particularly in the post-war era, clearly identified these features of society as the ones that are dangerous and the ones that are the cause of turmoil and strife, particularly in Europe. But the real problem for liberalism as a governing philosophy or as a governing approach is that because it is principally focused on the individual and also on the idea of the market and the mechanisms that are attached to it, it is unable to identify the things that are politically important. It doesn't, when it looks out at society, it doesn't see nations and communities and their traditions, but again, as I said, it sees those as obstacles to the world that it wants to build. So over time, this system was very successful in many different ways. It, particularly through its alliance with science and technology, it was able to unleash a huge amount of productivity, but eventually it abandoned its neutrality. It created a figure or an ideal type that it wished to promote and implement. The globe-trotting consumer citizen who's flying around the world and probably collecting a lot of passive investments through the stock market and not really tied to any particular community. This is like the ideal person. And it lost its ability, or even intentionally set aside, the key elements of a successful political order, that it's not just individuals with their consumer preferences generating statistics that can be optimized, but that a political community depends upon the real investment of citizens who can see their own success in the success of the community and the nation. So it left behind its neutrality, and it also left behind this element as well. It left behind its ability it left behind the key places where political decisions are supposed to be made. It began to view the traditional locus or place of political authority as part of the archaic system. So it set it aside. It wants to downplay the nations. It wants to replace them with more international and global concepts. It wants to do that, or it aims at this global or international goal for very specific reasons as well. The form of liberalism which came into view after World War II emphasized the goal of seeking a universal peace. And it said that this universal peace could only come if all countries in the world also became liberal democracies. This is an idea that ultimately comes from Immanuel Kant, but this is the reason that it focused on developing a package of international norms that can be subscribed to. So global liberal democracy is supposed to be like a political subscription service. In the early 1990s, they called it the Washington Consensus. It's a list of policies that all countries are supposed to implement. Everyone is supposed to commit to the same interpretation of free trade. Everyone is supposed to have the same structure of freedom of speech in the same way, namely administered by internationally funded NGOs that separate themselves from the political community and evaluated according to a kind of secret international standard. So it began to pull away policy as much as possible from national governments and communities. That's intentional because it says, according to it, global peace will only be achieved if all countries become liberal democracies. Or this is ultimately, as I said, from Kant's vision of a universal peace. So this is why it is so doctrinaire. It's why it's global. It's why it intends to leave behind the classical political forms. And to bring me back to the topic with which I began this kind of rapid download of my thoughts today, to bring it back to the original topic, for the same reason it expects post-liberalism to be the same. It expects post-liberal commitments to also be packages of doctrines and prescriptions that will be imposed throughout the world. Consider how they talk about President Trump when he is approaching the question of America's international commitments. They say, oh, President Trump now wants to have a new American right-wing empire where he will impose anti-migration policies on all of the partner countries. Well, that's not what he said. Instead, America realized, as Hungary realized some years ago, that liberalism or progressive liberalism had undermined its commitments, had undermined its strengths, and therefore it needs to re-examine its sources of strength and regain them. Then it can be a good partner in the Atlantic Alliance, and when the administration looks out at its European partners, it sees the same problem. Liberalism or progressive liberalism has worn away family, borders, and industrial strength everywhere, not just in one place. Of course, it's done it in a different way in different places, but the answer is not a new global prescription. Rather, the answer is that every nation and every country has to identify its sources of strength. This is what Balázs Orbán was pointing out a few minutes before. It's not intended as a new ideology or a new set of prescriptions that's imposed, and this is what the liberals expect, because they expect that only a global solution will work. So the proof that we have already entered the post-liberal era, and by the way, the proof that this progressive form of liberalism will not work, is that in its own definition of success, it has to be universal. It cannot just exist among a small set of nations. It is a global kind of civilizing, in its mind, mission. So we heard at the Davos Forum, the Prime Minister of Canada say, well, it's fine if some countries are abandoning the commitments of global liberal democracy. It's not a problem. We can recreate that among a smaller group of nations. Well, no. Abandoning the nation, abandoning family, tradition, culture, abandoning a strategic evaluation of your own situation, it only works if everyone does it. I mean, I also don't think it works, but it is for the progressive liberals something like the end stage of communism. Well, eventually we will get there, and eventually we will have global peace and universal enlightenment, and so it's absolutely rigidly important that everyone adheres to the plan. And until everyone adheres to the plan, yes, it will be difficult. I titled my talk, Really Existing Post-Liberalism, as a kind of homage to this old concept in socialism. They spoke about really existing socialism or really existing communism. What was this, as I understand it? This was that, well, when we get to the end stage of global communism, everything will be perfect. You can show up to the factory for a couple of hours in the morning and become a poet farmer in the afternoon and a poet in the evening, as Marx said. But in the meantime, it's a real situation, and we're not there yet. So they expect that post-liberalism is working the same way, but it's not working the same way. It's not a global set of rules, regulations, and norms that are to be implemented. Rather, it is a different view of human nature. According to the progressive liberal view of human nature, human beings are fundamentally antisocial. They do not naturally form political entities. According to the post-liberal, or we could also call it the pre-liberal view, it was the view of Aristotle, even more so maybe the view of Cicero and the Roman lawyers. That is not the situation. Human beings are fundamentally oriented toward political communities. Of course, they need law to shape them and point them in that direction. But ultimately, this is a return to a previous form of reasoning about politics. Also, and it's a subject for another day, it's a return to a different way of thinking about international law. Again, the liberals or the progressive liberals insist that only once all regimes become liberal democracies, as understood by the Freedom House and other international NGOs, only at that point will we achieve global peace and happiness. The post-liberal approach frustrates them because, as I've said now a few times, it doesn't operate in the same way. Instead, it is a world in which nations are realizing that they have been robbed. Something crucial has been taken away from them. What has been taken away from them? Their fundamental sources of strength. They're not allowed under that system to identify what their real situation is. What industries are strategic for Hungary to pursue? What industries are strategic for the United States to pursue? These were questions that were left behind. How can we foster family life and promote it positively? Well, not through a universal set of norms, because the family looks actually quite different in different societies. Some societies have more extended family networks. Some societies are more, binary with, the nuclear family, because people in the United States are moving all over the place and living away from their families. It's different in different countries, so the policies that result will be different. But fundamentally, it's a framework of thinking about politics. It's exhibited very well, I think, in the new U.S. national security strategy, not as a set of norms and prescriptions, but a way of thinking about politics that tries to be realistic about identifying What is our actual political community? What is the political community that is coherent and can really exist? It's not the international body, it's bigger than the narrow community, it's our nation, whatever that is. So what is its situation? What is its geography, its history, its characteristics? What trends are likely to occur in the future that will affect it? Of course, when we encounter this, we say, this is a very natural way of thinking. Why does it have to have a special name like post-liberalism? Well, it doesn't. It is a natural way of thinking, but it's a natural way of thinking which has been distorted and pushed to the side, particularly in the last 50 years. So I think these are the features of the era that's beginning and some of the problems in the most recent era that led to it. It's a great privilege to join you here today to talk about it, and I look forward to the rest of the presentations as well. Thank you.